Hey everyone, it's Roger, a hot guy who loves explaining movies. Nice to meet you. Today, let's chat about a thriller, directed by Ian Softly, Kate Hudson, Peter Sarsgaard, starring in the American Southern Gothic thriller, The Skeleton Key. Are you ready? Caroline Alice is a young female nurse, taking care of dying folks at a nursing home in New Orleans. It's tough work, but Caroline is really upbeat. Reading to Mr. Tucker this day, the sick old dude closed his eyes peacefully. In front of me is the final flash before dying. Caroline wasn't freaked out. Close the book and calmly tell the nurse that Mr. Tucker has kicked the bucket. Notice the book in her hand. It was the 19th century British writer Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. At the start of the story, the hero Jim takes care of old guy Burns, who gets a stroke. This is a preview of Caroline's upcoming fate. A wild journey is about to kick off. Caroline packed her stuff and waited for the family of the dead dude to grab them. There are some old boxes of the same type in the garbage storage area. Suddenly she felt sad. There is only one such box left in a lifetime, tossed and left unclaimed. Caroline was a bit let down at the nursing home. When she got home from work, she saw a job ad in the paper. The weekly pay for nursing the elderly is $1,000, including food and clothes. Caroline is obviously interested. The next day, Caroline hit the road. Drove to a private estate soon. It looks like it's been a while. The door was bare. Caroline rang a few times and tried to step in when no one answered. The inside of the mansion is pretty huge, musty, and creepy. Somebody seems to have just cooked in the kitchen. From across the yard, she saw an old lady cutting a guy's hair in the backyard. Behind him came the real estate dude, who said he was Luke Matthew. He was the one who got in touch with Caroline. Luke greeted to introduce the homeowner, Mrs. DeVore. Her man had just suffered a stroke and was paralyzed. The doc said he'd only be dead for a month. Mrs. DeVore gave Caroline a once-over with a weird look, and she didn't seem very pleased. Caroline didn't have a great first impression of her boss and planned to say no to leaving, only to be talked into it by Luke. Caroline decided to roll with it and packed up the next day. Soon, Caroline noticed the weirdness of this room. She can't find a mirror in the bathroom or bedroom. Simple. Caroline roamed around the mansion. The air echoed with Southern genius blues musicians. Robert Johnson's song, "Come to My Kitchen." This detail also reflects the plot. Legend has it that Johnson cut a deal with the devil. Soul in exchange for unbeatable talent. Died young at 27. Caroline went into Ben's room. Luke said he was paralyzed and couldn't speak. Mrs. DeVore showed Caroline how to give him his meds. After taking care of her husband, Mrs. Devon showed Caroline around the place. They bought this grandma's old house from an older brother and sister in 1962. Even left loads of stuff from the previous owner to show respect. Black and white pics are really old school, and another photo fell out when Caroline picked it up. A couple of black guys and women look like staff. There are also words on the back: Jaspai's dad and Cicely's mom. There are more than 30 rooms in the house. For convenience, Mrs. Devereaux gave Caroline a master key. Mrs. DeVoe specifically reminded me to keep an eye on the attic. It was stuffed with delicate antiques that were easy to touch and break, which sparked Caroline's curiosity. The next day, Caroline kicked off her work officially. She's already a seasoned caregiver, bathing the disabled elderly or something. After getting done in the shower, roll a wheelchair to stroll around the garden. The flowers are blooming. Ben always looked glum and seemed to have something big on his mind. Mrs. DeVore glanced at the toolbox and said she was forgetting the trillium seeds. So she asked Caroline to hit the attic. It's in the box by the stairs. Caroline used the master key to head up to the attic. After getting the seed, she suddenly felt movement in the front. There's a little door at the dead end of the attic with paint cracking off the handle. Somebody seems to be pushing inside, but it won't budge for a while. This time the master key is kaput. She went downstairs and handed in the seeds. Caroline asked about the little wonky door. Mrs. DeVoe said she hasn't unlocked it since she moved in. This sparked the girl's curiosity. Someone was definitely prodding the door from the inside. Late at night with thunderstorms, Caroline tosses and turns and hears something moving outside. Sounds like it's coming from Ben's room. She hit the door and find nobody on the bed. Caroline was in a bind. Open the window. Ben is jittering on the roof under the heavy rain. Who'd have thought a totally paralyzed patient could climb out of the window all by himself? and a few seconds later Ben landed face down. Caroline woke up Mrs. DeVore and rolled downstairs. Mrs. DeVore told Caroline to go upstairs and grab a wheelchair. Wait, there seems to be scribbling on the white sheet. She finally settled Ben after the rush. His deer in the headlights looked for help in the rain stayed with Caroline for a long time. The next day Luke swung by to change Mrs. DeVore's will. He was flabbergasted to learn that Ben climbed out the window. Ben was totally paralyzed. Caroline calmly took Luke to her room. She wanted to get out the sheet that said Mayday. But the sheets are spick and span and there's nothing. Caroline talks about her entanglement with her father. So she can get the hang of having an old man's blues. No one should kick the bucket alone. As Mrs. DeVoe pushed the door in, the vibe seemed to have a little jealousy. Luke gave a wry grin and slipped Caroline his business card. If you're curious, pop by anytime. After Luke clocked out, while Mrs. DeVore tidied the courtyard, Caroline snagged the master key and hit the attic again. There was a metal fragment stuck in it. That's why the key wouldn't turn. Clear the gunk and open the door smoothly. All sorts of animal bones, specimen, and puppets with teeth and eyes. There's a weird book on the table. The first few pages are family snaps. There are various squiggle diagrams drawn behind, which seem to be used for exorcism and blessing. There is a three-headed snake ring next to the book. Caroline loves music and quickly became keen on a box of vinyl records. One of the envelopes was stamped, "Sacrifice of Jasper's Father," recorded back in 1920. Caroline was too engrossed to catch Mrs. DeVore yelling. By the time she got upstairs, it was too late to bolt. Caroline was holding the record and didn't dare to breathe, but she was finally not found. By nighttime, Caroline biked back home to the city, slapped the sanctified record onto the record player. A black accent mumbling an unrecognizable spell, rhythmic talent with a special touch. Caroline was baffled, and her roomie Jill, in the background, was totally hooked by the record's tune. But panic was clear as day on her face. Later, when they were chilling at the bar, Caroline chattered about what happened these days. Jill spat out that this is hoodoo witchcraft. Plenty of old Southerners swear by it. Hoodoo witchcraft kinda stands for voodoo. Voodoo is a nature-loving religion. Origin is prevalent in West Africa, akin to shamans. The start of hoodoo is also in Africa. Mashed with African customs, Christ, Islamic teaching, plant and herbal wisdom. Jill's aunt was super into hoodoo witchcraft. Caroline headed back to the villa late at night and covered Ben's body with a quilt. She looked at the mirror mark on the wall and decided to nail the mirror. The next day, Mrs. Devon opened the door and was shocked to see the mirror. Immediately get Caroline out of bed. "This is my house. It's mine." Caroline also tossed a fit. "Tell Mrs. DeVoe that she's trodden the hidden room in the attic. You better spill what those pictures, charms, specimens are for, or I'm out of here right now." Mrs. Devon grabbed a cigarette and said, 90 years ago, this house was owned by a grubby banker named Thorpe, with him and his family and 2 black servants. That's right, the pair in the photo, Giuseppe and Cicely. Their secret identity is wizard hoodoo. That attic used to be their room. The banker was mean and heartless and often abused them. One day, there was a dance party at home. The banker's 2 kids are nowhere to be found. Black couple whipping up 2 kids in witchcraft. Thorpe and the guests thought this was a sacrilege, so they choked and torched the black couple. Ever since, freaky stuff has continued happening in the villa. The banker shot his wife and jumped to his death. Everyone figured it was ghost revenge between Giuseppe and Cicely. The younger siblings lived until 1962. Transferred the house to Mrs. DeVore due to financial bankruptcy. Legend has it that black couples who were executed were photographed. That's why there are no mirrors in the house. To fend off any evil spirits, Mrs. Devon also doused a circle of red bricks around the house. A few days ago, Caroline would have scoffed at this old-school superstitious stuff. Soon she found a ton of red brick dust in the tool shed. Could it be that Mrs. Devon has been wrestling with the ghost of the Avenger for years and years? The scoop is on the way, so hang tight for my next video, and let's hook up in the second episode of the Skeleton Key.